What's up, you freaking geniuses? So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to find intersections and unions of intervals. Okay, so just so you know what the difference is, here we have the interval 1, 4, it's in parentheses, and we have this other interval from 2 to 8, and it is in brackets, and as you can see, it has this upside down U looking symbol, or like kind of looks like an N, but this stands for an intersection. Okay, and intersections are related to AND statements. Okay. Now, on the other hand, we're still using the same two intervals here, right? 1, 4, and 2, 8. But as you can see, this symbol in the middle basically looks like a U, stands for union. And that's pretty easy to remember, right? Because again, this looks like a U and it's called a union, right? And these unions are related to OR statements. Okay, so that's the general difference between intersections and unions. So let's start with this first problem on the left. Here, again, we want to find the intersection of these two intervals. So from 1 to 4, which is in parentheses, and from 2 to 8, which is in brackets, right? So the first thing that we want to do is simply graph both of these intervals on a number line, all right? So first, let's graph 1, 4. So we're going to have a number line right here, and it goes from 1 to 4. So those are our limits, right? It's going to go from 1 to 4. Okay, and since we have parentheses around the 1 and a parenthesis around the 4, we're going to put parentheses right there also around the 1 and the 4. And then you simply shade the space in between there. Now, one thing I quickly want to point out here is instead of using parentheses, you could also use open circles, right? You could put open circles right there, and that would mean the same thing as the parentheses, right? Either one would work, but in this case, I'm just going to stick with these parentheses, okay? Now, let's graph 2, 8 on a number line, all right? So 2, 8. So I'm going to make my number line right there underneath it. And then I want to try and line this up a little bit, all right? So if 1 is right here, that means 2 would be something like here, right? And then 8 would be somewhere down here. Okay, now here we have brackets around the two numbers, so we're going to put brackets here at the two ends. Okay, now in this case, if you wanted to, you could put closed circles. All right, closed circles and brackets mean the same thing, but again, I'm just going to stick with the brackets. And then I just want to shade the space in between them. Okay, now in order to find the intersection of these two number lines, let's draw one last number line. And now we want to figure out where the two number lines overlap, okay? Because we want to include this interval and this interval. Okay, so you might notice that the space that both of these number lines have in common would be right here, right? So from there to there. Okay, so since this space right up here and this space right down here, right? Those are the spaces that they have in common. That's going to be the limits of our intersection. So it goes from this 2 right here, right, this positive 2, which has a bracket around it, to this positive 4, right? So then we're going to have a 4 right here, and the 4 has a parenthesis around it, right? So we're going to put a parenthesis right there. And then we'll just shade the space in between there. So it goes from positive 2 to positive 4. And there's a bracket around the 2 and a parenthesis around the 4. So the intersection of these two intervals is equal to 2 to 4. Again, with a bracket and a parenthesis. Okay, not too bad, right? So now let's try the union. So now we want to figure out what the union of these two intervals are. So again, the first thing that we want to do here is simply graph both of them on a number line, all right? So we already did that in the last problem. So we can do that real quick again, right? So first we have 1, 4. So we'll just say from 1 to 4 is something like that. And then from 2 to 8, right? So then we'll say from 2 to 8 is something like that. And then we, for 1 to 4, we have parentheses, right? Right there. And then we just want to shade that space in between. And then 2 to 8, again, we'll just put brackets at the end, since we have brackets on our interval, and just shade that space in between. Okay, now, lastly, in order to find the union of these two intervals, instead of just figuring out where they overlap, we want to get or include the furthest number to the left and the furthest number to the right, all right? So here you can see that between these two number lines, the furthest number to the left that we have is this 1 right here. So this limit right here where the 1 is, this would basically be the left end limit, right? That's a 1. And then the furthest point to the right that we have is this positive 8, right? So we'll bring that down as well. Now there's a parenthesis around the 1 right there, and then there's a bracket around the 8, so we'll put a bracket around the 8 right there. And then you would simply shade that space in between, right? So the union of these two intervals would be equal to 1 to 8, and then we have a parenthesis around the 1 and a bracket around the 8. All right, here's the next example that we're going to do. So here we have an interval that goes from negative infinity to 5. There's a parenthesis around the infinity and a bracket around the 5. And then we have this other interval that goes from 1 to 7 with parentheses on both ends, right? So first we want to find the intersection of these two intervals, and then we're going to find the union of these two intervals, right? So again, the first thing that we want to do is simply graph both of the intervals on a number line. So first let's graph this one from negative infinity to 5, right? So let's draw a number line like that. Negative infinity is all the way to the left and over here, right? Going to the left. And then we want to include this positive 5, which we'll put right there in the middle for now. Okay, so here we have a bracket around the 5, so we'll put a bracket around this 5 right there. And then we're going to shade to the left, right, towards that negative infinity. All right, great. Now let's graph this other one from 1 to 7. So we're going to have our number line right there. And again, we want to try and line it up the best we can. So we're going to say that 1 is probably around here, and then 7 is somewhere around there. And there's parentheses around those two numbers, right? So we'll put parentheses right here. Or again, you could put open circles. But here, we'll use parentheses and then just shade that space in between them. Okay, now lastly, in order to find the intersection of these two intervals, we'll draw one last number line, and then we just want to see where they intersect, right? What portion of the number line do they both have in common? So it looks like it would be this section right here. So it looks like where this 1 is, we'll put a 1 right there, and then where this 5 is. Right, so we'll put a 5 right there, right? So this portion and this portion, those are the two portions in common, right? So there's a parenthesis around the 1, so we'll put a parenthesis right here at the 1, and there's a bracket at the 5, so we'll put a bracket at this 5 over here, and then just shade that space in between them. Okay, so we can say now that the intersection of these two intervals is going to be equal to this right here from 1 to 5, right? So from 1 to 5, and then we have a parenthesis around the 1 and a bracket around the 5. Okay, now let's find the union of this bad boy. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is just graph these two intervals on a number line again, and I'm going to use a little math and magic to clean this up a little bit, and boom, just use these two right here. All right, so let's just bring it over to this side this time. All right, so let's find the union of these two. So again, when we're finding the union of two intervals, we just want to find the two furthest numbers, right? The number furthest to the left and the number furthest to the right. So here we can see that the number furthest to the left would be this negative infinity, right? So we can just bring this down here and say that the number furthest to the left over here is this negative infinity. And then the number furthest to the right looks like it would be this positive 7, right? So we're going to bring that positive 7 right there. And there's a parenthesis around the 7, so we'll put a parenthesis around the 7 right here. And then again, we could just shade that space in between them, all right? So the union of these two intervals, we could say, is equal to the two limits, right? So it goes from negative infinity to 7, right? So negative infinity to 7. There's a parenthesis around the 7, and there's always a parenthesis around any infinity, whether it's positive or negative. So we'll put a parenthesis right there also. All right, so here's the last example that we're going to cover, and it's kind of a special case because you're going to see that both of these intervals actually don't overlap. So let's see what we do in that case. So in any case, let's first start by graphing both of the intervals. So this first interval, we'll graph it on a number line right here. right? So it goes from -3, so we'll put a -3 right here, and it goes to the left, right, towards -infinity in this direction right here. There's a bracket around -3, so we'll put a bracket right there, and then just shade to the left in that direction, all right? Now let's graph this other number line, or this other interval right here. So this one goes from +5 towards +infinity, all right? So we're gonna say +5 is somewhere around there, and towards +infinity in this direction, right? So then we'll shade to the right in that direction. Okay, so in order to find the intersection of these two, we just need to see where they overlap, right? Or in other words, intersect. And as you can see here, they don't intersect, right? They have this gap from -3 to +5, right? There's a big gap right here. So since they don't intersect, we can simply say that these two intervals don't intersect, or you could say no solution, or you could say that they're just equal to an empty set. Okay, so there's no intersection, but now let's check the union, all right? So now in order to find the union of these two intervals, we again want to account for the limits, right, for this to the left. So that would be this -infinity right here, and also the limit furthest to the right, which would be this +infinity right here, okay? Now, however, we do again have a gap right here, right? So we do have to account for that gap. Okay, so the gap starts at -3, so we'll put a -3 right here, and there's a bracket right there, right? So we'll put a bracket right here, and then there's a gap right here, and then it starts again at +5. And +5, we almost forgot, there's a parenthesis right there. Okay, so let's bring that +5 right here, and again, there's a parenthesis. Okay, and let's not forget to shade in all those valid values right there. Okay, so our answer in interval notation for the union of these two intervals is going to be this left one right here, right? It goes from -3 to -infinity, right? -3 to -infinity, and then we have a bracket and a parenthesis, and then we have a gap over here, so we're going to say union to kind of account for that gap, and then we're going to write our other interval right here. So this one goes from 5 to +infinity, right? From 5 to +infinity, and there's parentheses on both ends, right? So notice that our answer is the exact same as what we started with, all right? So whenever there's a gap in your interval, that's going to be the case. So if you found the video helpful, make sure to leave a thumbs up down below. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments section below.